Joining me now for more on the day's developments from the Supreme Court is Congressman Javier Becerra, Democrat of California, up on Capitol Hill. Your reaction, because we're going to see this playing out in the larger context, of course, of the debate over immigration policy between the two parties. But what is your initial reaction to what was a divided opinion and only a preliminary decision, because we are going to see a lot of litigation and other challenges to come in years ahead?
Audrey, I'd say the court was reflecting in some ways the sentiment of the public. For years, the American people have been way ahead of the politicians. They've said, get this fixed. Immigration is broken. Get it done. We know the essential elements of what it takes. We can't have 50 different laws applying to 50 different states. And so to some degree, I think you see the Supreme Court essentially saying the same thing. States, we understand your desire, the desire of some of your folks to try to get this done, but you really have to do it not in a piecemeal way, but in a whole way that deals with the entire country. So I think in that sense the decision was good. I think it's unfortunate that perhaps some of these court justices haven't lived a life of someone who's been profiled, who's been stopped on a discriminatory ground. And so you take my father, who was born a U.S. citizen but grew up in Mexico as a young man, spent all his life working in this country, still speaks English with an accent, certainly looks Mexican if there's such a term, and yet if he happens to forget his driver's license one day when he's driving, would he get pulled over, maybe referred over to the INS? It's one of those things where you have to live it to understand it, and I think this is where the Supreme Court justices perhaps haven't lived that aspect of racial profiling. So I hope the fact that they left it open, that we can't let Arizona just go forward, and that that provision of the law that lets law enforcement ask questions about your status really will find its way to where these other three provisions where it went, and that is unconstitutional. So we'll see.
But you talked about the haphazard and state-by-state nature of this immigration enforcement, but isn't that Mitt Romney's criticism of President Obama, that there isn't a federal national standard? And the criticism, of course, is that he promised this and did not deliver. Now, the counter-argument, of course, is that he was blocked in many ways by Senate Republicans. But the bottom line is he was not able to produce what he had promised to the people favoring immigration reform.
And Andrea, you've essentially encapsulated the whole discussion here, and that's that if the Republicans were to take the foot off the brake of immigration reform, the president would fulfill his promise. And we've seen how the Congress had been willing to act, at least in both bodies, with majority votes, but the Republicans used the procedural tactic called the filibuster to kill immigration reform. When you have a majority in the House pass a bill bipartisanly, and then the Senate bipartisanly get 55 out of 100 senators to vote for that same reform, but then Republicans say, oh, we're going to use a procedural tactic called the filibuster to require 60 votes instead of 51. That's the problem. The president could have fulfilled his promise, but for the fact that Republicans keep stymieing any immigration reform that could go through the Congress. We'll get there. It's a matter of whether it's the Supreme Court or the American public being way ahead of the politicians saying, get it done. But we'll get there. And by the way, Andrea, one other aspect of the decision, which I think is fascinating, is the court's language that actually says the president does have broad discretion on how to implement immigration laws, which essentially goes right to the heart of what the president did just a little over a week ago to say young people in America who've grown up here, gone to school here, are valedictorian, want to go serve in the military. He can take the action he took to say, right now we're going to defer any action on deporting you.
Now, you were instrumental in helping to legislate health care, and now we know it's going to be Thursday. That's the only decision day left. We're going to get a decision one way or the other on health care. Are you bracing yourself for the health care law that you helped put together to be overturned in part, at least?
Actually, my optimism has been bolstered by the decision today by the court, which essentially reinforced that we are a nation not just of laws but of immigrants, and it reinforced the sense that we have to act as a people, one nation. And we see what happens when you try to be one union, yet you don't have the laws in place that let you act like one nation as a whole. The Europeans are having difficulty because they are separate nations trying to act in many ways as one country. In the U.S., we have a court, I hope, which will understand that we are one nation and that everyone deserves to have decent quality health care, and we have a law that allows us to do that and does it in a way that's been recognized in the past by the courts that you can move forward. And so if the court doesn't want to become too political, as it has in some of its recent decisions where it essentially equated money with speech, then I think we have a chance of seeing Americans for the first time have real, genuine access to quality health care that they can afford to pay.
In fact, of course, the court moved even further today and upheld or reversed a Montana law and expanded and reaffirmed its Citizens United ruling. We'll have more about that later with SCOTUS blog. But thank you very much, Congressman. Thanks for being with us.